When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. So begins William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily. There are stories you read, and there are stories that refuse to leave you. William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily is one of those stories. Most people remember it because of its ending, but I don't think that's why it has endured for nearly a century. I think it endures because beneath its Gothic mystery lies something profoundly human, the fear of time. Today, for our Faulkner Friday, I want to show you why this short story is about far more than just murder. It's about memory, loneliness, tradition, and what happens when a person refuses to let the past die. But before we can understand A Rose for Emily, we first have to understand the world from which it emerged. Published in 1930, the story appeared at a pivotal moment in William Faulkner's career. He had not yet received the Nobel Prize, and the monumental novels that would secure his place in the American literary canon were still unfolding. Yet, even in this relatively short work, many of the themes that would define his fiction are unmistakable. Memory, the burden of history, the decay of the Old South, and humanity's desperate struggle against the passage of time. If you have read The Sound of the Fury or Absalom, you'll immediately recognize these concerns. A Rose for Emily is not simply an isolated Gothic tale. It is one of the first windows into the imaginative world that Faulkner would spend his entire career constructing. The story unfolds in Jefferson, Mississippi, the fictional county seat of Yoknapatawpha County. Although entirely imagined, Yoknapatawpha has become one of the most richly developed literary landscapes in world literature. Faulkner once drew maps of the county, gave it a history, populated it with generations of interconnected families, and returned to it repeatedly throughout his novels and short stories. It is his equivalent of Thomas Hardy's Wessex or Henri de Balzac's Paris, a fictional place capable of expressing universal truths about the human nature and about human experience. Every road, every house, and every family carries the weight of memory, making the landscape itself feel alive with history. At first glance, A Rose for Emily appears to belong comfortably within the tradition of Southern Gothic literature. We find an aging mansion slowly collapsing into ruin, whispered rumors circulating through the small town, mysterious disappearances, and an ending that remains one of the most shocking in American fiction. Yet to read the stories merely as a Gothic mystery is to miss what makes it extraordinary. The decaying house, the unsettling atmosphere, and even the famous final revelation are not the story's true subject. They are the language through which Faulkner explores something much deeper, the quiet tragedy of a woman unable to let go of the past. Perhaps that is why the story continues to haunt readers nearly a century after its publication. It's not simply because of its surprising ending. Countless stories contain unexpected twists. Rather, A Rose for Emily lingers because it asks a question that remains profoundly human. What happened when our memories become more real to us than the life unfolding before us? That question extends far beyond Emily Grierson. It touches every one of us. We all carry moments we wish we could preserve forever, losses we struggle to release, and versions of ourselves that continue to shape who we become. Emily's tragedy may be extraordinary, but the emotions that produce it are deeply familiar. One of the greatest mistakes readers make is assuming that Emily Grierson is the villain of this. It's understandable why they do. By the final pages, we discover a revelation so disturbing that it threatens to redefine everything that has come before. But Faulkner is too compassionate, too perceptive of a writer to create a character who exists only to shock us. Instead, he slowly invites us to see Emily not as a monster, but as someone who has been shaped, constrained, and ultimately broken by forces much larger than herself. From the very beginning, Emily is denied the freedom to determine the course of her own life. Her father dominates the household with an almost tyrannical authority, rejecting every suitor who might have offered her companionship and independence. Even after his death, his influence lingers with astonishing power. Emily initially refuses to acknowledge that he has died, keeping his body inside the house for several days, as though refusing to surrender him to time itself. It is a deeply unsettling moment, but it also reveals something profoundly tragic. Emily has spent so many years living under the authority of another person that she cannot imagine a life beyond his absence. Loss for her is not simply painful, it is unimaginable. The town only deepens her isolation. Rather than seeing Emily as a woman with fears, grief, and loneliness, the people of Jefferson transform her into an institution. Faulkner writes that she is a tradition, a duty, a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town. That sentence reveals one of the story's quiet cruelties. Emily ceases to exist as an individual and instead becomes a symbol onto which the town projects its nostalgia, curiosity, and judgment. They watch her windows, speculate about her private life, criticize her choices, and gossip about her relationships, yet almost no one attempts to know her as a human being. The irony is devastating. Emily lives surrounded by people, and yet she remains utterly alone. This, I think, is where the emotional heart of A Rose for Emily begins to emerge. Faulkner does not ask us to excuse Emily's actions. Instead, he asks us to understand the loneliness from which they grow. The story is not an attempt to justify evil, but an invitation to recognize how isolation, grief, and the inability to release the past can slowly distort a person's humanity. Before Emily becomes the unforgettable figure revealed in the story's final pages, she is first a daughter, then a woman abandoned by time, and finally a person whose desperate desire to preserve love becomes indistinguishable from her refusal to accept reality. That tragedy, not the murder, is what gives this story enduring power. One of the first things readers notice about A Rose for Emily is that it does not move through time in a logical way. Every event appears out of sequence. Years pass between paragraphs without warning. This is typical Faulkner. We are told about Emily's funeral before we truly know her, then suddenly transported back to her youth, then forward again, only to be drawn into another memory. At first, this structure feels sort of disorienting. We naturally expect stories to begin at the beginning and end at the end. Faulkner refuses that expectation, and in doing so, he asks us to read memory rather than chronology. This technique would become one of Faulkner's defining artistic signatures. In novels like The Sound of Fury or an Absalom, he would push this fragmented treatment of time even further. But A Rose for Emily already reveals the philosophy that lies beneath his experimentation. Humans do not remember their lives in orderly sequences. A familiar smell, an old photograph, or a passing remark can suddenly transport us decades into the past before returning us to the present. Memory is associative rather than chronological, and Faulkner reshapes narrative to reflect that reality. Instead of asking us to observe Emily's life from a comfortable distance, he invites us to experience the way the town itself remembers her, through the scattered recollections, half-forgotten stories, and lingering impressions that refuse to settle into a neat timeline. The narrator plays a crucial role in creating this effect. Rather than giving us a perspective of a single individual, Faulkner employs the collective voice of the town, speaking through the unusual pronoun we. The narrator is less an eyewitness than the accumulated memory of Jefferson itself. The townspeople remember Emily the way communities often remember one another, selectively, imperfectly, and through years of gossip, admiration, speculation, and rumor, their account is fragmented because communal memory is fragmented. We're never given complete certainty about every event. Only the pieces have survived in the minds of those looking back. This fractured structure does more than create suspense. It reflects one of the central truths of the story. The past is never neatly behind us. For Emily, history continually intrudes upon the present, until the distinction between yesterday and today begins to disappear altogether. The story's unusual chronology therefore becomes part of its meaning. Long before Faulkner transformed literary modernism with his great novels, he was already asking a profound question. What if time is not something we move through, but something that continues to live within us? If Emily Grierson is the emotional center of the story, then her house is the most powerful symbol. Faulkner introduces it as a big, squarish frame house that had once been white, standing stubbornly among cotton gins and gasoline pumps that represent a changing South. In just a few lines, he establishes a striking contrast between past and present. Once elegant and fashionable, the house has become an aging relic surrounded by a world that has moved on without it. It is impossible not to see Emily herself reflected within its walls. Like the house, she belongs to an older generation whose values and identities seem increasingly out of place in the modern world. As the story unfolds, the house becomes less a setting than a physical manifestation of Emily's inner life. Its shuttered windows, dust-covered furniture, and sealed rooms suggest a place where time has slowed almost to a stop. Nothing is allowed to change, because change would require acknowledging loss. Every unopened door and every neglected room speaks to Emily's refusal to release what has already passed. The house preserves objects, memories, relationships with the same determination that Emily clings to the people that she has loved. In Faulkner's hands, architecture becomes psychology. The building itself tells us what Emily cannot express in words. The townspeople, of course, never truly enter this world. They stand outside the gates. They speculate about the strange odors drifting from the property and whisper about the mysterious woman who rarely emerges. Their distance is significant. They know the appearance of Emily's life, but not its reality. The house therefore becomes both a prison and a sanctuary. It protects Emily from a society that constantly judges her, yet it also isolates her from any possibility of healing or renewal. The walls that preserve her memories are the same walls that will prevent her from living beyond them. By the time we reach the story's final pages, the house has become something even more unsettling. It is no longer simply an old Southern mansion, but a monument to denial. Every room bears witness to Emily's desperate attempt to preserve a world that time insists on taking away. That is why the ending feels so haunting. The horror does not begin when the locked bedroom is opened. It has been quietly accumulating in the house from the very first page. Faulkner reminds us that buildings, like people, can become repositories of memory. And sometimes, when memory is left untouched for too long, it begins to decay into something far more frightening than simply nostalgia. When Homer Barron enters the story, he appears to offer Emily something she has been denied for most of her life, possibility of the future. Until this point, Emily's world has been defined almost entirely by loss. Her father has died, the social order that once elevated the Grierson family has begun to disappear. Even the town itself is changing around her, replacing grand old homes with cotton gins and gasoline pumps. Homer seems to represent the opposite of everything Emily has known. He is outgoing, while she is withdrawn, sociable whereas she is isolated, and perhaps most importantly, he belongs to a world that is moving forward rather than backward. Faulkner carefully emphasizes this contrast. Homer is a northerner, a laborer, and a foreman responsible for bringing modern infrastructure to Jefferson. In many ways, he embodies the arrival of the New South, one less concerned with aristocratic family names, and more interested with industry, commerce, and progress. Emily, by contrast, remains a daughter of the old Southern aristocracy, raised to believe that family reputation and social standing determine one's place in the world. Their relationship is therefore about far more than romance. It becomes a symbolic meeting between two different historical moments. It becomes a symbolic meeting between two different historical moments. The fading traditions of the Old South and the relentless advance of modern America. Yet Faulkner quietly hints that Homer never intended to marry Emily. The narrator remarks that he liked men, and it was known that he drank with younger men in the Elks Club, that he was not a marrying man. Whether Homer simply values his independence or has no desire of marriage at all, the effect upon Emily is devastating. Once again, the future she begins to imagine threatens to disappear before it can truly begin. For someone who has already experienced profound abandonment, the possibility of losing Homer becomes unbearable. Emily has spent her entire life watching people leave her, first emotionally, then physically, and finally through death itself. It is here that Faulkner reveals one of the story's deepest tragedies. Emily's greatest desire is not power or revenge, it is permanence. She longs for something that time cannot take away, but permanence is impossible because love, like life itself, exists only through change. Relationships grow, evolve, and sometimes end. Emily cannot accept that truth. Rather than allowing herself to experience another loss, she chooses the only form of permanence that she believes she can control. In doing so, Faulkner transforms what simply could have been a Gothic plot into a meditation on the human temptation to preserve what was never meant to last. If you have never read A Rose for Emily, I sincerely hope that you paused this video before this point and experienced the ending for yourself. Honestly, I probably should have put a disclaimer, spoilers, so I'll probably edit that in. It remains one of the most unforgettable conclusions in American literature, not because it relies on shock alone, but because it forces us to reinterpret everything that has come before. What first appeared to be an eccentric portrait of an aging Southern woman suddenly becomes something far more disturbing, far more heartbreaking. When the townspeople finally enter the long sealed upstairs bedroom after Emily's death, they discover Homer Barron's body lying in the bed, preserved within a room prepared decades earlier for a wedding that never took place. The details are chilling, the faded furnishings, the dust that has settled long after everything is over, the quiet stillness of a life suspended outside ordinary time. Then Faulkner delivers the image that readers almost never forget. Beside Homer lies the indention of another head on the pillow, and resting there is a single strand of Emily's gray hair. With remarkable restraint, Faulkner never explicitly explains what happened. He trusts the reader to complete the horrifying picture. Yet I would argue that the greatest horror is not the corpse, it is the loneliness that has made such an act imaginable. Emily does not preserve Homer because she delights in death. She preserves him because she cannot bear another goodbye. Throughout the story, every relationship in her life has been defined by separation and loss. Her father controlled her until death took him away. The town watched her without truly seeing. Homer represented the possibility that life might begin again, and when that hope threatened to vanish, Emily chose the illusion of permanence over the certainty of grief. Her crime is terrible, but Faulkner's greater interest lies in the emotional despair from which it emerges. This is what elevates A Rose for Emily beyond the conventions of Gothic fiction. A lesser writer would ask us only to recoil at Emily's actions. Faulkner asks us to mourn the life that has made those actions possible. The final image of gray hair is horrifying precisely because it reveals years of unimaginable solitude. The story leaves us not merely frightened, but saddened by the realization that a human being became so consumed by the fear of loss that she abandoned reality altogether. In Faulkner's hands, horror is never simply about. It is about the ways grief, memory, and time quietly reshape the human soul until the boundary between love and possession disappear. When we close A Rose for Emily, it's tempting to remember it simply as a story with one of the greatest plot twists in American literature. And certainly the ending deserves its reputation. But I think that if the story's only achievement were a surprise, we wouldn't be reading it nearly as 100 years later. Countless stories contain shocking conclusions, like I mentioned before. Very few continue to provoke conversation across generations. Faulkner's story endures because the ending is not the destination, it is the culmination of a much deeper exploration of memory, history, and the human condition. At its heart, A Rose for Emily asks a question that lies at the center of nearly all of Faulkner's fiction. Can we ever truly escape the past? Every major character in his novel wrestles with this question in some way. Benji Compson lives almost entirely through it. Quentin Compson cannot free himself from the weight of family history. And Thomas Sutpen and Absalom spends his life pursuing a dream that ultimately destroys him. Emily Grierson belongs to the same family of characters. She's not haunted by ghosts in the supernatural sense. She's haunted by memories, by expectations, and by a world that no longer exists but continues to govern every decision she makes. What makes Emily's tragedy so devastating is that she mistakes preservation for love. She believes that if she can prevent change, she can prevent loss. It's tempting. It's a temptation that is far more familiar than we might like to admit. We preserve photographs because we fear forgetting. We return to familiar places because they remind us of happier days. We reread beloved books because they reconnect us with earlier versions of ourselves. Memory is one of the great gifts of being human, but Faulkner also reminds us that memory becomes dangerous when it replaces life itself. Emily does not simply remember the past. She chooses to live inside it, and in doing so loses any possibility of a future. Perhaps that is why the story continues to resonate so deep. Although very few of us will experience Emily's extraordinary circumstances, all of us know what it means to struggle with change. We know the pain of saying goodbye, the desire to hold on to moments that can never return, and the fear of stepping into an uncertain future. Faulkner does not offer easy answers to this. Instead, he asks us to confront them honestly. His story suggests that the past deserves to be remembered, but it must never become a prison. The moment a memory begins to dictate the present, tragedy quietly follows. One of the reasons I continue returning to William Faulkner is that he refuses to reduce human beings to simple categories. Emily Grierson is neither purely innocent nor purely monstrous. She is lonely, she is proud, she is wounded. She is shaped by history, by grief, by a lifetime of isolation. Faulkner asks us to look beyond the sensational details of her life and consider the quiet emotional forces that make those details possible. In doing so, he transforms what could have been a Gothic horror story into a profound meditation on time, memory, and what it means to be human. I think that's why A Rose for Emily remains one of the finest introductions into Faulkner's work. Within just a few pages, we encounter nearly every theme that would define his career. Fractured time, the burden of history, the decline of the Old South, the complexity of memory, and the extraordinary depths of ordinary human life. If this is your first experience with Faulkner, you've already met the questions that would echo through The Sound of the Fury, As I Lay Dying, Light in August, Absalom, and many more. The story is not simply an isolated masterpiece. It is the doorway into one of the richest literary worlds ever created. And if you wish to get your copy, I have the collected stories by Vintage. There's also a hardback version. It's called the Selected Short Stories. So it's by Modern Library. So you can get the big old boy here, or the Selected Short Stories. As we close today's Faulkner Friday, I'd like to leave you with a question. What in this story frightened you the most? Was it the discovery in the bedroom upstairs? Was it Emily's inability to let go of the past? Or was it the uncomfortable realization that all of us, in one way or another, struggle to release the moments we wish we could keep forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this discussion, consider subscribing and joining me for each Faulkner Friday. On Friday, I explore different aspects of William Faulkner. He's my favorite author. We will continue exploring Oknawa County, one story at a time. Next week, we'll turn to an introduction into Light in August, what I think is undoubtedly one of the best ways to get to Faulkner's novels. So, until then, keep reading and keep reading beyond the syllabus. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Until then, keep reading beyond the syllabus.